Hi everybody, good morning from rural Ireland and happy Felt United Day 2023. Our theme this year is changing seasons, and if you are a wet felt maker and you are not already a member of our Facebook group, just do a search for Felt United on Facebook, request to join, and you will be blown away by all the beautiful work that people worldwide are felting in response to this theme. So I just really wanted to have a very impromptu Q&A session to celebrate Felt United Day. My name is Nicola Brown. I'm a felt maker and eco printer, and I live in rural Ireland. This morning, I'm not actually at home. I'm on my iPad from a friend's house because I am minding dogs. So if the sound quality isn't great, you're going to need to leave me a comment, and maybe just leave me a comment anyway and let me know where you are tuning in from. So what I've actually done is I have collated questions that people have been emailing me or have left on some of my YouTube videos over the last number of months. So these are the questions that I'm going to be actually answering during this live stream, but I would really love to answer some questions for you live as well. So if you have a question, I'm working here by myself today because, as I say, this is just a surprise live stream, so I've no help in the background. So if you've a question, please ask it as a comment and put 3 question marks in front of your comment and 3 question marks behind, and that makes it very, very much easier for me to read what you are asking. So I'm just going to get right into it and get started. Some of you may be experienced felt makers. Some of you may be inexperienced. You may be watching this live, or you may be tuning in afterwards and watching the recording. So what I would like to just start with is answering the question, what exactly is wet felting? So felt is a non-woven fabric. It's the oldest known man-made fabric, and it's created using natural materials. And in simple terms, felt is when we lay out animal fibers such as wool, alpaca, llama, various different animal fibers in layers. We add soap and water, we agitate this with our hands, and we encourage the fibers to mesh together and form a fabric. Now, if you look at a strand of wool under a microscope, if you just look at one little piece of a wool fiber under a microscope, it has little barbs on the outside. It's not totally smooth. So when we lay different layers of fiber, particularly wool, and we start to rub and roll them, those little barbs mesh together, and then what happens next is the whole piece of fabric that is forming, the felt, shrinks. And once the felt has shrunk and it has got significantly smaller than the starting layout, you have created a piece of non-woven fabric that you cannot pull apart again. So that's a quality of a good piece of felt. You could never pull it apart and get back to your original materials. It's meshed together, it has shrunk, and you can cut it with the scissors and it will not fray or unravel. Whereas if you think about knitting, if you cut a piece of knitting, from a jumper or something, a sweater, if you cut a piece of knitting, you can pull the knitting yarn and you can unravel the jumper. Whereas if you cut a piece of felt that has been made very well, you will never be able to unravel it again afterwards. So the materials and the equipment necessary to start felting are really very, very basic. And over the years, things have probably changed a little bit. So if I start with the, that would be in the on the equipment side of things, but in the material side of things, it's very, very basic. You need fiber, and I recommend everybody starts with wool. You need fiber. you need water. And that's really, that's really it. With the equipment, you need some soap, if you can call that equipment. It's just a supply. You need soap, and I recommend an olive oil soap. And you need something to work on. So in years gone by, people, often felted on rush mats or bamboo mats, or maybe on a piece of leather or something. Whereas nowadays, the easiest way to start wet felting is to work on bubble wrap. And that's the packaging material that has all those little air bubbles in it. And I recommend a small bubble, not the tiniest bubble, but a small bubble, definitely not a bigger bubble. So something like you would often get goods packaged in. And you can recycle and reuse this material, this bubble wrap, for months, if not years on end. But I know when I'm teaching, adults and children alike, everybody likes bursting the bubbles with their fingers. It's very therapeutic. You need those bubbles just to help protect your fiber, and they help in the felting process. So don't be tempted to burst those bubbles. So that's really it. You need fiber, warm water, soap, and your bubble wrap. And very, very simple materials to get started. And if you're wondering where to maybe buy them from, there are very, very good online suppliers all over the world. In Ireland, we have plenty of sheep. Obviously, there are loads of sheep if you know Ireland well. But often people ask, can they use the raw fleece, the wool straight from the sheep's back? And my answer is, if you are new to wet felting, don't even attempt to use that. Order merino or another nice quality wool online, and all the good felting suppliers, such as Living Felt in the USA, or I recommend Vulknall in Germany. They will all have information about each type of wool or each type of fiber they sell. And if you read that information, they will tell you what the fiber is good for. But if you're new to felting, merino, anywhere between 19 and 21 micron, will felt easily, and you will be able to concentrate on learning the process without worrying about your piece falling apart. Now, it's also possible to create beautiful felt from alpaca, and there are many other types of fiber, including dog, your own hair, should you so choose, quivet, which is a type of animal similar to a yak. You can felt with camel hair. There are many other types of animal hair that it is easy to felt with, but I recommend you start with wool. And don't try felting wool directly from the sheep's back with grease in it until you have plenty more experience. So then once you've decided you're going to use wool, what sort of preparation do you use? Because when you look at some of the felting suppliers, particularly I would say in Europe, you may have the opportunity to buy wool bats or wool roving or wool tops. And I started to felt with wool bats, and all this preparation, it comes directly from the woolen mill. The woolen mill has cleaned and washed the fiber. They may have dyed the fiber, and they've started carding this. And carding is the process by removing tangles. Think of it a little bit like brushing your hair to remove tangles. So they've started carding it, and they've laid it out into what look like large blankets of fiber, with the strands of the wool, the individual wool fibers are actually laying relatively randomly. So that is very easy to felt with, although it's not probably what most people start with. Most people start with roving or bats, and that's where the fiber has gone a little bit further in the processing compared to bats in the mill. So what happens with the roving or the tops is that the bats continue to get carded. They continue to get combed by big needles on big drums in the woolen mill. And then they are all lined in the same direction. And then they are wrapped into big balls of fiber. So all the fiber, it's like big long strands with all the fiber going the one way. And that's probably what you will find the easiest to buy, and it works beautifully. I started with bats, but I usually teach with roving or tops because more people can access them. So the next thing is, are you intending to embellish your felt? And by that, I mean, would you like to have any different sorts of fiber or detail on the surface of your felt? Maybe you want to make a felt wall hanging and you want something to stand out and create interest. Or maybe you're making a scarf and you want some silk on the surface to shine. So there are different sorts of embellishments that you can use. And the easiest ones and the simplest are fiber, yarn, or fabric. So fiber would be just, you know, it could be wool or it could be dog hair. It could be the same fiber that you're felting with, but all you would be doing if you wanted to embellish it would be, you would be adding some pieces of a different color. So let's say you had a turquoise scarf and you wanted to create a design or some flowers on it. You could use wool of other colors after you've laid out the structural part of your scarf. So you've got 2 layers maybe of a winter scarf laid out, and then you just add the surface detail, you add your design, like painting with the wool. Yarn is very, very easy to use because you can just use knitting yarn and you can draw with that yarn as embellishments. And if you're watching this on the replay, I know I've had quite a few questions recently. So if you're not joining live and this was your question, the question was, can you use synthetic yarn or fiber? And the answer is yes. So there are many acrylic knitting yarns, and there also is a wonderful fiber called Firestar. That's a tri-lobal nylon. Now, I try and be as environmentally mindful in everything that I do, but I do love the Firestar. So if you have any old wool, or if you're in a thrift store, a charity store, and you see balls of artificial knitting wool, that makes really excellent embellishing fiber for the surface of your felt. And then you can also use scraps of fabric. So if you use an open weave wool, for example, or a mohair, that will felt in very easily because the wool from your base piece will combine with the wool of your fabric, and also light scraps of silk, and they can make very good embellishing fibers. So how long does it take to make a piece of felt? Well, how long is a piece of string? So the simple answer to that is that different people felt at different times. And I often get asked, you know, how can I make the process quicker? So the thing about wet felt is, if you understand that the wool fiber has little barbs on the outside, and that as you start to felt, you need to massage your pieces, and the fibers and the little barbs start to tangle together like this. They sort of come together and then it shrinks. So if you understand that correctly, it's probably easier then to understand that if you rub the wool gently at the very beginning when you are creating your felt, the actual process happens quicker. So I often find in a workshop that somebody who's actually slow and calm laying out their fiber is slower than other people to get started adding the soap and water and doing the rubbing or the rolling process, but they end up with their felt finished earlier because when they start really slowly, the fibers tangle together and then very quickly the piece is made. So my top tip for you, particularly if you're new to wet felting, is be very, very gentle with the fiber at the beginning of the process. Treat it gently and with respect, and you will find that your pieces will actually felt quicker. And there's no problem leaving a piece. You could lay it out one day, you could add your water and soap, you could come back to it 2 days later. There's no problem leaving a piece. And often if you leave it for even an hour for a rest, you will find that it starts coming together quicker afterwards. And then you might be asking yourself, well, if I can work on a bamboo mat or a rush mat, would that be quicker than working on bubble wrap? It's not necessarily quicker for every project, although it is very helpful for certain projects. So I find if I'm making felt cords or balls, I prefer working on a bamboo mat. I find that I can make them quicker. It just is the nature of that particular process. That doesn't mean I can't, work on bubble wrap, but I like a bamboo mat or a sushi mat for making smaller jewelry components. And sometimes I will actually pick the mat up and I'll fold it and I'll rub the mat in my hand with the wool in the center. And don't forget, if you have, I'm just going to flash this up, if you have any questions for me as I'm going along, you can actually put those questions as a comment and make sure to put 3 question marks in front and behind, because I'm here by myself and it's hard to to see your questions. So these are just ones that have come into me. So I would say work on bubble wrap for most of your projects, but a bamboo mat is great for smaller jewelry components. And then a very large bamboo mat or a split reed mat. If you think of a big blind that often students will use, those sort of big bamboo blinds, if you take the hardware off that and you have a bigger or a heavier project, maybe you're making a small rug or something, and you want to be more aggressive, I would usually start that on the bubble wrap, but I would transfer it over to the bamboo mat later in the process because I can be more aggressive with it, but only once the fibers are coming together and the piece is starting to shrink. So can you explain the felting process simply? Well, the first thing I would say is I have several full-length videos here on my YouTube channel. So if you enjoy following along and felting in real time, I have 2 different step-by-step flat felting tutorials. That would be where I recommend you start. And then I have a Nuno felting tutorial and a felt vessel tutorial. And they are all recorded in real time, so you can felt along with me. So the felting process, in very simple terms, or the step-by-step process, you would lay a piece of bubble wrap on your table with the bubbles facing up. You would lay layers of wool fiber down, and depending on what you were making, that could be 2 layers or 3 layers or 4 layers. You would be wetting and soaping the fiber. You would be adding optional embellishing fibers such as silk or yarn. Then you would be putting your second piece of bubble wrap face down onto your felt, so the bubbles would be down. So if you think of the bubble wrap like the bread and you think of the wool like the filling in a sandwich, you won't go wrong. And then it's a matter of rubbing gently and then rolling in different directions through the bubble wrap at the beginning to start encouraging the fibers to come together. And once they start that, you roll and you shrink your piece, then you wash it out and you have a beautiful piece of felt. Now that's in very, very simple terms, but my videos will give you that full step-by-step information. That's not what this particular live stream is about. So you might have heard of something called prefelt, and prefelt is wool fiber that you've either started to make by hand, that's what I call proper prefelt. So you would have just started the felting process, and as the fibers were coming together and they formed the fabric, you would just stop, you wouldn't work any further and shrink your felt. And so then on another occasion, you could cut that matted, very gently felted fiber into shapes, and you could include those shapes as detail in your piece. But you can also buy commercial needle punched felt. It's also sold under the name prefelt. And this could be pure wool. It could be in different thicknesses. Some companies offer also a beautiful prefelt that's made using 70% wool and 30% silk fiber. So that would be a lighter option if you were making scarves. And if you really had health issues or you were working on a larger project, you can cut the pre-felt into shape, such as into a long scarf, and you can just felt that without laying out any fiber. But from the creative perspective, I like to use pre-felt if I'm working on a big project and there's going to be a lot of surface embellishment, or if I've hurt my back, if there's some reason that I'm not going to lay the fiber out by hand. Laying the fiber out by hand is so rewarding, and it's creative, and it's just a joy to handle. So use the pre-felt, the commercial needle punched felt if you need to, but don't forget it's such a beautiful craft, wet felting, and I love to lay the fiber out by hand. And then if you're asking yourself if you want to use pre-felt as an embellishment, when would you actually add it to your project, and will it felt in? I would always say just add it as, if you're adding it as embellishment, I would lay my piece out. So if it was a winter weight scarf, it would have 2 layers of fiber. If it was a felt vessel, it would have a minimum of 3 layers. And then I would lay my cutout shapes of pre-felt as the final embellishment. I wouldn't be making a structural layer with the pre-felt. It would be the final embellishment. Whereas if I was making a large wall hanging, maybe for an exhibition, and I wanted a base that was quicker to do if I had problems with my back or I was lacking time, I would then cut the pre-felt into shape, and I would maybe lay 3 layers of pre-felt, and then I would do all the surface detail by hand with various embellishing fibers or fabric. And then, how do I finish my felt professionally? This is a really good question. And there was also a question that came in last night, overnight, about how can you care for the felt and how do you prevent it shrinking in the wash? And in a way, these 2 or these 3 questions, they mesh together. So I think that as a beginner, it's very, very easy not to understand that you need to shrink your pieces quite a lot. So when you're making flat felt, you know, I would say you're looking for about 33% shrinkage. When you are making Nuno felt, which is a combination of fabric and fiber, a lot of fabric, a little fiber, you can work with about 50% shrinkage. So when you could measure your piece at the beginning and you could, you know, check what the size was. But I think that if you're asking yourself, is it finished, you know, totally, I would say the answer is no, if you have to ask yourself that. So you need to see, is there any stretch left in it? Good quality felt is made by stretching your piece and shrinking, stretching, shrinking, rotating, turning it upside down, doing the same thing near the end of the process. So if it's still very stretchy, it has not shrunk enough. And then in relation to getting nice edges on your piece, there are different tips that I would share during face-to-face workshops, turning the edges of the fiber in, for example. And you'll also see that on some of my videos. But turning the edges, the tips of the fiber in at the outside, you can get a nice even edge on your piece. But you can also, at the latter stages of felting, you can rub individual pieces of your project against the bubble wrap. So if you discover you have one area where you're not happy with the edge of a piece, there's a big wobble in it, you can rub any bit that's protruding, that's sticking out, rub that on your bubble wrap and press your fingers firmly into that bit. Let's say this is the piece and there's something sticking out. I would put my fingers on that area and I would just rub it back and forwards on the bubble wrap, pressing down firmly on my fingers, but not pressing down hard anywhere else. And then if there was an area where instead of sticking out, it was almost as if there wasn't enough wool, there was a concave curve so that it wasn't very even, but it was going in. That's when I would get a big pair of pliers or use my fingers and I would just pull the wool fiber out. Not at the very outside edge, I would put the pliers in a little bit further and I would pull it out and try to even the edge up. And a great tip for getting nice quality smooth felt is near the end of the process, actually roll your felt up in a piece of linen. So a linen tea towel, for example. So I like to do some of the end of my felting in a linen tea towel instead of bubble wrap, first with soap and then without soap. So I would wash all the soap out of my piece. I would wash the soap out of the linen tea towel, and then I would work it. And that can give you a really nice quality of felt. So in relation to washing your felt and maintaining it afterwards, if you have created it well in the first place and there isn't shrinkage left, there will be absolutely no problem you hand washing your felt afterwards, and it won't shrink. So in fact, all my own felt, I wash mine in the washing machine. And I'm not suggesting everybody tries that if you don't have experience, but I am saying I have every confidence in my felt, and that's what I tell any of my customers to do. They can wash it on the wool setting with a low temperature, plenty of water, not too much agitation. And then I like to iron my pieces on both sides on the hottest setting of the iron as soon as they come out of the washing machine or they've been washed by hand. Now, those of you who do know me well will know that I'm passionate about creating beautiful effects on my felt and fabric, on eco printing, basically using leaves, vegetation from my garden and onion skins, without using traditional powdered mordants. So it's called eco printing in the dirty pot. And I've just been teaching wet felting and eco printing in Australia. And the tips that I would give anybody when you are doing this is work with the same fiber for the felting as you normally would. But as I explained to my class in Australia, consider using cellulose-based embellishing fibers. So instead of using silk maybe as an embellishing fiber, use something like bamboo or viscose. And the reason for that is that when we're working in an environmentally mindful and health conscious way and eco printing without traditional powdered mordants, cellulose fiber and fabric, so cotton, linen, bamboo, banana, pineapple, all those fabrics and fibers do not absorb the natural dye from plants anything like as easily as wool or silk or alpaca. So if you use the embellishing fibers, plant-based embellishing fibers, you will have really fantastic results with your eco printing. And if you're interested in seeing some of those results, just check out my Instagram account and you'll see some of the beautiful pieces that the ladies in Geelong in Australia were felting. And then if you're felting three-dimensionally, if you want to make something like a simple felt vessel, you know, a bowl or a bag, again, I have a video here on my YouTube channel. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like my direct style of teaching, you can follow along step by step and you can felt your vessel. And I like to work using, there's something in the center of a three-dimensional piece. I like to use laminate floor underlay for that. And laminate floor underlay is a kind of a squishy foam that would go underneath a wooden laminate floor to give it a little bit of insulation and protection. So that's what I like to make my resists from. But really, I think that the most important thing is to take your time. And when you're working around a template, every stage of the process, until it's really coming together and your piece is starting to shrink, at every stage, you want to be pulling the fiber in around the edge of the template. If you think of your template like a letter, and if you think of your fiber like an envelope, and just think that you want that envelope to be snugly fitting over your letter, you won't go wrong. So if you do have any questions, now is the time to ask them as a comment. But otherwise, I would like to thank you for your attention. I would say if you would like to connect with fellow wet felters and fellow eco printers, get some inspiration. There are a couple of things you can do, and also to connect with me. So I have a great public Facebook group that Shauna and I moderate. It's for people who are interested. Initially, it was for people who have studied with me, and then people who are interested in learning more about both processes. And if you search for Nicola Brown hyphen eco printing and wet felting on Facebook, you will find a public group. We also have a Felt United group on Facebook, and my great American buddy Dawn Edwards, a fantastic felt hat maker, and we moderate that group. And this whole live stream is to celebrate Felt United Day 2023. And then individually, if you aren't already following me and are interested in eco printing and felting, I probably post more about eco printing. My main textile account is called Nicola Brown Clasheen, but I also have a new account called A Rustic Irish Life. And that shares a lot about living in rural Ireland and the broader aspects of becoming more sustainable in both my textiles and in what I do and how I live. So it's a little bit like slow living or lifestyle, gardening, rural Ireland, etc., etc. So I'd love for you to join me over there if you're interested. And I'm just going to have a quick look and make sure there are no questions. Yep, all the questions that came in are answered, and there are no new questions. So thank you all so much. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Consider following me here on YouTube. Happy felting and have a fantastic weekend. I'm just checking again. I did answer Andrea's question there. Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Over and out from rural Ireland.